That makes a lot of sense. I mean, one analogy I was thinking about is I think about the history of technology business, right? Before we had the pure tech industry, we had what we called the IT industry, right? Which was effectively technology plus services because no one knew how to use technology, right? And then technology got developed enough, people understood enough, you moved into a pure tech phase. My analogy has always been that where we are with RPA is like back in an IT phase, right? Because you need so much consulting and system integrations and all that type of stuff going on. I mean, one, do you guys agree with that categorization? And then two, what is the path forward? Like, how do you move beyond that?
The truth is that with RPA, we are actually getting away from the integration, the deeper integration. That's the reason why the RPA is, right? Though I would be honest enough to state that probably the bots might not be an extremely stable solution over the very, very long period of time, but they're bridge solutions, right? So they're quick and they're fixed, right? It's like a quick fix that you can have, and things will be getting working at least for you. Now, what I believe is that the adaptation is mostly for those industries, those domains where building something on the legacy systems or the systems that are in existence is extremely expensive, but the data must flow between the systems, right? That's one of the greatest things that we're seeing. But with the incoming of the intelligence and with the robots, things are changing a lot. One of the classic cases, I believe, which is making a transformation is all about the paper data transformation to digital data, where, in fact, every platform is trying hard. I'm sure you guys must be also doing that, trying hard to get the paper data into the digital data format in the simplest way. You throw any documents, the robot identifies what the document is, brings out the key pair values, and uploads into your
We already talked about faxing today, so the next logical one to talk about is digitizing paper.
Yeah.
It's 2019. Sorry, keep going.
Yeah, that's all. Like, I believe with the intelligence coming in more into the robots will remain as an operational workers, whereas the intelligence will drive their that emotional value what the human is doing at this point to some extent.
Yeah, I think a big part of going back to we went back to that IT stage of things. I think there's a good trend that happening in the last few years where there are roles within the organization that are now sort of owning that efficiency sort of flag. And so operation teams in general, it was like DevOps and sales ops, been there for a while, but now there's like customer ops and legal ops and finance ops and people ops, and every department understands that efficiency is an important step. So for example, one of the early decisions we made was we want a no-code type of robotic automation, because what we actually want is to allow those operation business users to be able to build those sort of robots to take on workflows to work with people and with a different data. So I think going forward, I think where we'll see that shift from sort of an IT type of world into a more end user is those type of drivers, those type of roles within the organizations that sort of own the making things better with automation and robotics and thinking about it in sort of a strategic way.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think it's interesting because, and again, correct me if I'm wrong here, but there's one version of RPA, which is a very top-down version, I would almost say, where it says, hey, this is a new tool that allows us to force structure where right now there is a loose process, right? Where you say, okay, like there's a 50-step process in steps here and here. We currently have all this variation. We can make it into an RPA solution, slot it in, and guarantee ins and outs. You're shaking your head, which is good. And then the other version is kind of this like, hey, it's almost like the mini bot version, right? Which says, hey, we don't even know everything that's going on, team. Like, there's no top-down view, but each person in each team can kind of can augment their own workflow individually. Almost like super macros is almost the way to think about it. I mean, one, I'm curious where you think we are today in terms of how people think about RPA and then implement it in various ways, and then two, talk a little bit about where you think we end up.
Right. The very first thing business looks at whenever they're implementing RPA is the ROI, and when they look at the first initial set of processes they're deploying. Those are the macros that you're talking of.
Yeah.
Right. The ROI eventually doesn't make sense after a couple of processes being deployed. And when they start taking the holistic view of the program of RPA, overall program of RPA, then that's the time when ROI really makes sense. So in other words, the question that you asked, to answer that very straight, the macro side of the RPA is not really going to help unless and until you have an end-to-end processes really deployed, which was actually been done by humans in the past point of time. The macros or the small macros have been in existence already in the past, but they haven't done what exactly RPA is doing today's day.
Yeah.
At this point of time. So it's basically we look at something like 20 hours of time saved as the minimum to actually invest in a process for automation. That's the kind of, or something like
20 hours per what?
Per month.
Per month.
Per month.
Per user or just per month period?
Per month.
Okay.
Right? It might be 4 runs of the process, 5 runs of the process, but we look at least 20 or 20 to 30 hours of time saving human effort before actually a process can be robotized or invested into it, or else it really doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah. Fair enough.
No, I think that, I think we've seen a similar thing. That if you're just trying to take like a super macro to take care of one task, it sort of falls short on what it actually the bigger impact on the business is. But when you think about it in a way that a work or a workflow is built out of multiple steps that needs to work across different teams and across different sort of business use cases, and you build for that, that's when you actually start seeing huge savings. There's a lot of studies recently that literally knowledge workers spend, I don't know, it's like 2.8 or something hours a day on high value work, and everything else is like low value work, right?
Yeah.
And so you can try to solve it by a lot of use macros, but at the end of the day, if you think about that process from a high level and you design for it with what are the parts that people need to do and what are the parts that should be automated, but automate the entire flow, that's where you actually gain huge efficiencies.
Fair enough. So when you think about like the current world of RPA technology, right, that people are excited about and deploying, my mind goes to obviously OCR, right, and kind of some basic window manipulation, right, is the way I think about it. I think about like being able to open and close programs and insert values and things like that. And then I guess to some lesser extent also like speech recognition and speech to text, but like, which is, maybe. But the question is like, if you could wave a magic wand and add any fundamental capability, right, to RPA solutions, what do you think would unlock the most value? Like, what do you think fundamentally would make it way better?
I believe there are two. First, the one that you have been already speaking of, it, like the OCR, the intelligent OCR. That's where you really bring in a lot of operational efficiency into the system. When you throw documents at it and the robot does the thing. That's probably what the many of the consultings that we have done in the past, it actually starts with the document conversion.
Mm-hmm.
They think RPA is the solution for document conversion, which is actually not. Right? The robots make use of third-party services for those document conversions.
The robots just call it phone effect, right?
Yeah. That's right. The second thing that we are seeing that really great value around is that it's a combination of work between the robot and human, where robot stops in between for human to take over, to do certain things for them, and once they're done, and robot again takes over. For an example, the cases of high value approvals, cash approvals or financial approvals, right? Robot takes the things from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8 process, stops there at number 8, waits for that human to give the input rightly, and then carries on again from 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So it's like, robot and the human working in sync. I believe that's coming in probably next couple of months or in a quarter or so. It's already there. You guys have already been there.
So yes, it's exactly the right. It's a bit self-serve, but you just mentioned it. So, but that's basically why we built Tonking. Is basically saying that exact thing. Is you just can't take the people out of the loop. They're a big part of it, and approval cycles are a big part of it. But there's a lot of mundane work that needs to be, delegated to robots. And I think that's why we're focusing directly on those human in the loop processes with the handoff. And I think, but talking away from talking more broadly on automation, I think what RPA started to sort of with this new flame of, hey, there's things we didn't think about in the past we can automate. I think the future of it is to think broader than just task-based, and really what are all of those things. I think last panel that talked about
customer centricity.
Yeah, exactly, and like how, like taking notes in a meeting, and like how do you combine all the different technologies, whether it's speech, whether it's like OCR, whether it's coordinating with people, whether it's performing like repetitive tasks, like how can you take the entire thing and think about it more of an orchestration thing that is automated versus just a single task. And so that's something we're pushing for, but I think that's where the entire sort of industry of automation will move from, again, this IT to like in everything.
So when you look at the RPA market broadly, I mean, it is amazing. You have like UiPath, Automation Anywhere, Blue Prism, like a few of these guys who just went from nothing to being close to $10 billion company overnight, right? It's huge, and it's incredible, right? UiPath, someone correct me, is like the fastest revenue company in the history of the world.
That's right.
Now, there's a lot of asterisks on that, right? But still, an amazing reality. You now have all these platforms, the Salesforces of the world, Microsoft, et cetera. Everyone's kind of building up in their own versions, Genesis, whatever, their own kind of platform version. And then you have startups, right, other people coming in inbound. If you had to look forward a few years and say, this is what the automation landscape looks like, everyone agrees that we're going to go from having CRMs to starting to figuring out how to like drop processes in and automate. Is this a open source set of frameworks that lots of people plug different pieces into? Is it, the same players now, right? Is it the platforms? Like, who do you think is going to win this thing?
It's something that I probably can't predict at this point of time, but what I can say is that probably in the next couple of years, there would be a lot of unification and standardizations around the robots. Now, probably there will be providers of robots with the efficiency of robots. There will be providers of engines which can make robots work, right? So at this point of time, there is no apple-to-apple comparison between the providers, how the package thinks, right? Someone is only selling their robots, someone is selling orchestrator robots plus the studio, someone is saying, no, it's all one. So there is no comparison like that. So eventually that's going to settle down. So I believe that there's already attempts being made, which is trying to make a robotic development language, a unified language. So they come out as a single language for all robots. And probably the providers like these big players, they bring up their own robots and you just plug the code, develop code into those robots at this point of time. But behind all this thing is the contribution of the developer community that works really hard for it.
Fair enough.
I think it's a little bit depends on how do you think about automation and robotic in general. Like, personally, I think it's sort of next generation of software as a whole. Forever it was software is basically writing things into a database and reading things from a database and just a bunch of UIs. And what the difference between a CRM and a bug system? It's the same thing. It's just different UI components. In a way, robotic is just a new way to think about software in general. So instead of sort of people working for the software to fill information, it's a thing that works for people in a way. And so what that means to me is that there's just not going to be one solution. It's just like there's not one software that rules everything, right? So software provider. Maybe there will be exactly. Maybe there are going to be winners in certain areas, but as a whole, I think it's just going to be a shift in the way people think about software when they implement them, or startup when they come up with new ways to fix problems.
Fair enough. Do you guys have any questions about RPA? Yes.
This is very new to me, but it's very intriguing. And I'm curious, both of you, do you have a process or method that you identify the opportunities or gap that you think that can be robotized? And also, is there a metric around what kind of task you think that's possible or valuable to be robotized?
Okay, you want to start?
All right. Yeah, if you're looking for an answer around those process mining tools, they have not been really efficient based on my personal experience and how we have experienced with many of our clients, right? They require more inputs than what they could have done. I strongly believe that the process mining and discovering of the process still remains pretty much a manual process at this point of time, where you work very nearly with the SMEs, subject matter experts, and the business owners to get to know the process. As is, then the next step is that to optimize it for it to be robotized or to do the automation. I'll tell you a very simple study that we have. Out of 10 processes that we make an attempt at the first time to robotize, it's actually around not more than 3 processes that pass the feasibility, that whether they can be RPA'd or not. And then we make a second pass by optimizing the process with the SMEs and business owners, then probably that increases by 15 more percentage. So in whole, if you take 2 passes with each system optimizing them a little bit, so you nearly achieve around 40% automation, not more than 40 to 50% of any process that's identified. So obviously, around 50 out of 100 processes really cannot be automated at this point of time on a broad experience.
I really think it comes down to what are the parts within a process that you want to scale. And when you look at any process and you start to dissect it into the different components, it's where the high value work versus the low value work comes into play. And a lot of times when we work with customers and we look at the process is really, really painful for them, the answer is actually redesigning or rethinking about the process. You can keep the same tools, you can keep the same people, but thinking about what are the areas where are actually high value, not trying to go and automate them because it's just not gonna work, because people still need to do that. But the low value parts are the ones that you sort of trying to design. So we actually came up with this concept of like people first process design in a way, because it comes down to that process design flow that helps you gain this big efficiencies versus trying to build automation that doesn't really make a difference.
Yeah, I'll just add on this. This is something actually we spend a lot of time on with Finn actually, is we have this approach, we say, look, people-centric first. We go into a company, we'll log everything. Every click, every scroll, every DOM element, everything continuously. And then on top of that, what we bake out is basically a data set per task, etc. We know by workflow exactly what the process quick flow is for everything. And then what we do, I'll tell you just what we look at is the P50 to P80 cases. So the cases that take between, in terms of the speed or how long they take, we look at cases that are either in the middle up to the 80th percentile, because beyond that there's always weirdness above and below. And then we basically look for the places where most of the work, if you look at the bell curve of how a thing is done exactly the same way over and over. So many keystrokes or many elements, but very little variation. And then we go and watch those segments. Right? We go actually review what was happening to help indicate in what direction we're going. Now we're not, by an RPA standard, a formal process mining tool. We don't do the output the way process mining tools want it done. But with a people-centric first, I think that is really how you have to do it to start at least. Okay. Yeah, one more.
When clients come to you for RPA consulting, is the motivation primarily cost, or are there other motivations like, for example, I'm thinking from the perspective of a sales manager, operations manager, you may want to cut out some of these tasks that are really mundane in order to retain some of your high talent. What are some of the biggest motivating factors that clients come to you for?
Yeah, you answered them already first. It's cost. It's the cost, that's the first point that most of the ROIs are calculated, like on the RPA side. Though it's always said that there is a qualitative and quantitative benefits of RPA, but it's mostly the quantitative first. Qualitative comes the second thing. Yeah, it's the cost. It's the biggest thing is the cost, and I believe it becomes really effective when your cost factor is at least $25 to $30 an hour, wherever it applies, right? Anything below that, again, it doesn't make sense.
I think that's exactly the difference between sort of the bigger RPAs and the bigger companies that use them. So for us, it's actually the opposite. It's for operation teams to gain scale and so people will focus on the important stuff and that things won't fall through the cracks. Those kind of things are actually where people are sort of deploying Tonkin. But I think where cost comes into play is when they think about scaling. And what would it mean if I had 10x, 20x, 30x of whatever it is, where it's customer support, where it's leads coming in, how am I going to handle that in the same type of high value quality work, and sort of help use automation to balance the low volume and then work so people can still focus on those stuff.
Yeah, so sum it up, he also agrees, finally it's the cost.
It's all of those things. Guys, thank you so much. I think this is an awesome conversation. And again, more conversation of RPA appears. I'm going to plug it every time. Thanks, guys.
Cheers.
Cheers.